Hi there, welcome to my channel. My name is Crystal and this is Books Forever After, where I sit on the floor and we talk about everything and all things books. Today is a collab video hosted by the collab queen, Becky from Bex X Reads, along with a few other booktubers. And that is Andy from AZ Reads, April from April Happily Ever April, Jess from Honest Fiction, Kristen from Kristen Craves Books, and Tara from Tara Talks Books. I will link their channels down below, as well as a playlist once that is available. So that way you can watch everyone's video after you watch this one. Okay. Always don't forget to click the like and subscribe button and hit that notification bell so you can be notified every time I post. Alright, with all that out of the way, let's get started. Okay, so I have about 9 books here and it is bothering me to the center of my soul that the fact that I don't have 10. and it's not an even number, so but we're just gonna roll with it, okay? Alright, so I have a few here that are YA, new adult, and adult, with some options here, and some of these you probably have heard of and some of these you may not have. So yeah, this will be really interesting. So before we get into that, I wanted to kind of mention kind of ask you a question. Why do you like vampires, and why do you like vampire romances specifically? Crystal from Crystal's Bookish Life put that question out there and just asking why do we like vampires so much, and what is it about vampires that we love? And I really appreciated that question because it really made me think, why do I love vampires? It all started, as a teenager, especially, with Twilight being out during that whole, it came another craze, and I feel like every 10 years or so there's another big push or big trend, as trends kind of happen that way. And sometimes, there's people who love vampires all throughout that, and then sometimes there's this big trend of, popularity that kind of just happens. So for me, I think the reason why we like vampires and vampire romances especially is because I have to say it's a sort of angstiness kind of already built in, because it's this morally gray hero that has been, waiting for you across 100 plus years. It's sort of like a kind of a pining kind of feeling in a way. And then also it's just a matter of the fact that you were worth that wait. And then also that, there's that dangerous, element to that, and that the fact that he is kind of fighting his control, as well as, the dangerousness of it, but fighting for his control and his desires in a very complex way. I think it kind of just holds that. It's a very complex power dynamic at the same time. So yeah, I don't know. So what do you think? Just let me know down in the comments. Why do you think we love vampire romances? Alright, with the book recommendations that I have here, as I mentioned before, I do have 9 recommendations, and we'll start with the most recent one that I just reread, which is Once Upon a Broken Heart. This is a YA romance by Stephanie Gerber. The third one is actually beginning released later this month, A Curse of True Love. And while you think of Once Upon a Broken Heart, you probably think of the magical and whimsicalness of it. But there's actually is a small part of vampires in this book. It's not the primary plot, but there is an interesting plot, I would say sequence, that occurs that I found in this book that made it even more intriguing between the two main characters. So you are following the Prince of Hearts and Evangeline. And this kind of crosses over with the Caraval series a little bit. You don't have to read the Caraval series to read this one, but this is kind of like a crossover. There's something that happens at the beginning of this book where she's to implore the Prince of Hearts to stop a wedding from occurring. Her love, or her, I guess, truly her fiance, or her true love, ends up somehow marrying her stepsister, or going to marry her stepsister. So she stops it. She kind of like wants to stop that wedding there. I really enjoyed this one. As I mentioned, I read this back in February, but then I reread it this time. I actually enjoyed it better the second time around. The first time I was dual reading it with an audiobook while physically reading it, and then what ended up happening was I was actually listening to it on my commute into work, and I wasn't finding that I was like really immersed into the story as much, or like kind of like retaining it. So it kind of took away my enjoyment. So reading it just physically this time around, I enjoyed it so much more, and I knew kind of what to expect as well, and just kind of get my mindset into more of a YA, fun, whimsical things don't really necessarily make sense. It's kind of like slowly revealed to you in this world and how the magic works. So now the vampire aspect to this one is in relation to one of the fates. One of the fates, Chaos, is a vampire, and there's an interaction between Evangeline and the Prince of Hearts with this fate. And there's a little bit more. I don't want to give any, it would be spoilery, so I don't want to give away what happens, but it is a very intriguing plot that involves vampires for about a chapter or so. But I found that it was definitely a plot point that drove their relationship, or this story forward into the climax of this book. Now here I have a blast from the past. This is a YA book from, oh my gosh, let me see. So this is a book back in the 2010s, so it's about 13 years old. However, this is also a 12 book series, but they're relatively short. They're about 300 pages. Now this is coming with a caveat. I have not read this since probably 2012-ish or so, this series. However, yeah, I do remember really enjoying it. So I think this also is a perfect one for fall. As you can see, I have like the this is the 9th one. I think I own the 9th and the 10th book. I am trying to collect all of these back from library sales. So when I have like the first couple, I want to start rereading these. But what I do remember is really enjoying it. So these were like 5-star reads, I do remember. However, I do remember, like, I still have parts of this that I remember that I really enjoy. I remember cats actually play, like they're like really, these vampires are very connected to cats. So that was always what I remember really interesting. There's also a suspense plot here with there's like unraveling this suspense plot with the leader of what is called the Dark Daughters. It's the school's most elite group, and she finds out that the leader is misusing her goddess-given talents. As we know, Nyx is the goddess of the vampires, so that is kind of like what plays into there. I do really like how the lore is used in here, how it's very, and it was also very unique. Around this time Twilight came out, so this had a very unique take on this. There's also, this takes place at a boarding school. So essentially, I have the summary here. Zoe Redbird, who is a 16-year-old normal teenager, dealing with high school stress, her boyfriend Heath, the star quarterback. Next thing she knows, she is marked as a fledgling vampire, forcing her to leave her ordinary life behind and join the House of Night, a boarding school where she will train to become an adult vampire. And that's if she makes it through the change, and not all of those who are marked do make that change. She is also not your ordinary fledgling. She has special powers. She's not like other girls. So if you don't like that trope, that might not be, which I think is a common trope in YA, but if you don't like that kind of trope, you may not like this one. However, she discovers she has amazing powers, but along with her powers come with bloodlust and an unfortunate ability to imprint with Heath, her boyfriend, who just doesn't know how to take no for an answer. So there's things like that. Not only is she a fledgling at the House of Night with special powers, she discovers that there's that suspense plot with the leader of the Dark Daughters, who is in the most elite group, and that she is misusing her goddess-given talents, or goddess-given gifts. So Zoe must look deep within herself for the courage to embrace her destiny with a little help from her new vampire friends. So yeah, I do remember like there's a lot of like witchy magical elements to this book and to this series. So if you like that, both of that kind of somehow mixing in with the lore, you might enjoy this series. Next, I have the Vampire Academy series. You may have heard of this. It's had a resurgence. I know there was a new TV show that was created. I can't remember what platform. I believe it might have been Amazon Prime. I'm not sure. However, there was also a movie called Vampire Academy that just, I don't think did the book justice, and that was probably why it kind of flopped. It was just kind of, I think, not the best way to convey this book, so I think that's kind of why it didn't do so well. With that said, I read this back in college and it was just so great. So I'm also the same thing as House of Night, trying to collect all of these back so I can do a reread of these as well, and just for nostalgia's sake, I just really enjoyed these books. As I mentioned, this is a 6-book series. This actually kind of focuses on a friendship between two friends. Obviously, this focuses on a friendship between two teenage girls. This focuses on Rose and Lisa. Lisa Dragomir, she is a vampire royalty, like heir princess kind of a thing. So all these families kind of are royalty. Each one of them become like an heir and become the ruling queen or something like that. So it's kind of very interesting how that plays into it. However, her and Rose are in a car accident with Lisa's family. Her parents die as well as her brother, but her and Rose become connected somehow with their powers. So here we have Lisa, who is a Moroi vampire. So these kind of Morois are mortal vampires, so they're born as a vampire. And Rose is her guardian, so she is a human guardian who has bonded with her, that makes her a vampire, so that in that car accident she helps save Rose in that way, so they're connected somehow. And all of these vampires also have some sort of supernatural gift, usually in the form as well in elemental magic. So the reason that we have guardians, and that is what Rose is going to be training to be, is because of the Strigoi. So there's two types of vampires. We have the Moroi of mortal vampires and the Strigoi, which is what your typical, when you think of a vampire, very aggressive, very bloodlust, kind of like no conscience, so they kind of lose their humanity in that aspect as well. And they can be turned, so you can be turned into a Strigoi. So I believe either guardians or Moroi can be turned into a Strigoi, kind of that way. So once you're turned into a Strigoi, you basically are considered dead because you're just no longer, and the whole emphasis is to try to rid the world of the Strigoi because of this whole dangerous aspect, this high stakes that they kind of bring this element to it. This one brings an element of some political maneuverings, a little bit, a very dramatic suspense as well, of like trying to figure out, this. There is a battle later on in the books as well, and there's also a very angsty romance. You also have a sweet romance between Lisa and another person, as well as Rose with her instructor. So we have with her instructor with the guardians and that kind of thing. So I have that little forbidden romance aspect to it, as well as some other more angsty elements or outside forces that kind of make it very addicting to read, that I really, really enjoy. Alright, and next, you can't think of vampires and not think of Twilight. That kind of like, this brought a whole like dynamic to this whole to pop culture. But we have Twilight, and this edition I had was actually a special first edition that I received at the time. It had like the beveled edges, so I reread these Twilight books multiple times. I have not yet read the Midnight Sun, which is from Edward, book 1 on Edward's point of view, and I don't know if I will, but perhaps one day I will reread these. If I do, I might do the audiobook. However, I don't think there needs to really much to be said about this. You know, vampires, they sparkle. Vampires and werewolves, some angstiness, you know, it stands on its own. However, obviously I would still recommend this because it's just nostalgia's sake, and it's still, there's still things that are problematic, but if you can look over them, or just not really problematic, they just have like some, probably wouldn't stand as well today, but it was still an enjoyable read. I think it'll be fun to read and reread again. However, there's also, if you think of Twilight, we have Crave by Tracy Wolff. I recently read this a couple months ago, so it's very Twilight vibes. There is actually a plot point in here where Twilight is actually involved. So the author really loved Twilight, and it took their inspiration from that. It is nothing like Twilight, but it does have that kind of like an ode to it a little bit, but with a really intriguing premise as well. It's also another academy, a magic school kind of academy kind of a thing. This is where you are following her and you're discovering all these creatures kind of exist. She becomes, the main female character becomes orphaned, and she goes to live with her uncle and her cousin. He is the, oh god, what's the word? Headmaster or something like that of this academy. And it's kind of like they're all kind of like, it's a magical school academy we're trying to keep hidden from her. You know, vampires and werewolves, and I believe there's sirens as well in there that I can remember. And witches, I believe. So yeah, it's like a whole kind of like multiple creatures kind of a thing. And there's also a love triangle in this one as well that I believe it develops. So from what I heard, I only read book one, but I hear that there is a love triangle that happens. I don't know between who, but yeah. You do read this pretty fast. It is a really fast-paced book. There are a lot of slang and kind of terms that it can come across as juvenile. However, I found like midway through, like it actually became addicting, and I started really enjoying it. So I'm interested in seeing how book 2 does, but this might be one that I would recommend that you might pick up and try. Next is one that I read on Kindle Unlimited, and that is the Zodiac Academy. Now, I have read books 1 through 3, and I've been kind of started reading these beginning of the year. And this is kind of gotten, I think, mixed reviews so far. I think I hear a lot of people love it, but some people don't. But this is following two twin Gemini sisters, and they're orphans, and they're kind of like find out that they're changelings, and they are down on their luck, and they started with this, and they're just trying to live day by day. And they are pulled into this world, or transported to this world by like a professor telling them like, hey, telling them exactly who they are, and like skipping a jump in there into this Zodiac Academy where they're first, being discovered what their powers are and things like that. So they are there's a lot of like different kind of magic features that help in there. So they are also the lost heirs of this kingdom. Their parents were murdered, and that is also and now who's leading it is actually 4 different families, as well as their heirs or heir apparents. So those are the 4 boys that you encounter, and this is kind of like a bullying romance as well. So the first book was, there was some editing errors. I think I noticed a lot of this book, and this is independently published, but I do find that like it got better throughout. I think about 30-40% of the book it got very, very better, and highly, highly addicting. So this was definitely a very addicting book, and they're all very chunky, like 600 pages books, but they're very, as I said, I was just like eating them like potato chips. They're just so good. You can just keep going through. I believe there's 8 books out now, and I believe there's gonna be 9 books out. So it seems a little daunting, but they're actually really a lot of fun. I do like how in the second one the girls do get a little bit more gumption, so they're being bullied not only by these heirs but like pretty much everyone in the school. Power is what is really the driving force of the society. You have a lot of different so if you're weak at all in any shape or form, you're not going to really survive. So it's really like all hands on deck, you need to be able to survive. So it's very, very high stakes, dangerous world. There are multiple creatures. There's elemental magic as long as horoscope magic kind of a thing, and that plays an element. So yeah, and everyone has also some sort of, I want a fae type. So you could be, there's like a dragon, there's like, you could be a wolf, like a werewolf. You could be a siren and things like that. So it's kind of like the Zootopia. Kind of like the Zootopia of like school academies. So it's very, very, very interesting and highly, highly addicting. But I am going to be reading The Shadow Princess here soon. But so far, I really enjoyed it, and I do definitely recommend. Next, we have A Ship of Bones and Teeth by Karina Halle. This was a release this summer, and this is kind of like a Pirates of the Caribbean meets The Little Mermaid in like a dark fantasy romance, and this was really good. So definitely when I say it's dark romance, there are some triggers, so please check your trigger warnings. It's basically what would happen for the Little Mermaid, you know, Ariel, if she did all this sacrifice for the prince, but the prince ended up not being such a nice guy. So and then 10 years later she tries to find and search for the witch that cursed her, so forth, and to reverse her spell to her. So what happened here is she becomes separated from her family and everything. There was just such a sweet moment there. So yeah, this is Princess Marin, and she meets Ramsey, who is a pirate, and they're both seeking the sea witch, so they kind of find up and join together and search for the sea witch. And with vampires in here, I don't want to say exactly how they're involved, but it is a very interesting take on how vampires are kind of introduced in this world, because Marin is a siren, so there is some magical elements here. And with that, with witches and sirens, and how that kind of works. So very interesting. Definitely really enjoyed, and this was my first book by reading by Karina Halle, and so I'm really looking forward to more of her works. Next, of course, you probably already heard of this one too. It's very widely popular, widely known. It's from Lana Nash. So this is first time I read this book was in January, and I read books 1 through 3. Marathon those ones in January. I still need to pick up the fourth one, The Queens, but before I do, I know there's like a sister companion book that's kind of like almost set in a prequel world before I read the fourth one. So this is vampires, your traditional kind of like very historical fantasy setting, where the heroine is what is called the maiden, and she is kind of basically hidden and covered with a veil from people's eyes, and is awaiting some big noble, like her ascension, so to speak. Things happen that you'd find out in this world of those who are not what they say they are. There's also a kind of setting to where she falls in love with her relationship with Hawk, who is her guardian, her guard, and things kind of ensue from there. So with this book and the second book, the world kind of evolves and grows into something more than just vampires, and more of the lore and more things about the heroine as well. So it's very where you kind of are learning and kind of experiencing this world with Poppy, and some other things that happen. So book 2, I think, was my favorite so far. It was just the most angstiest ever. Really, really enjoyed it, and definitely recommend. And looking forward to reading the rest of the series. And lastly, a book recommendation I have for you is Serpent and the Wings of Night. I have recently read this one in August. So as you notice, like I just re-delving into, I never knew like mainstream traditionally that there were vampire books available. So I've been finding that with Kindle Unlimited, there are a lot more a lot more accessibility to those type of stories that I've been looking for. So yeah, it's been really interesting to find. But this one is by a new favorite author of mine as well. My first book by this author, by Krista Broadway. I've been hearing this all over BookTube and recommended to me by my friends. But is where Aurea, she is an adopted daughter of like the vampire king there. She is a human that was orphaned, and she's basically living a life of just high alert and like survival mode constantly, because she is surrounded by vampires, and where vampires rule the world basically, and humans are just looked as chattel, like food. So following this big trial that's kind of held by and revered by the goddess Nyx, where it's called the Kajari, where all the vampires, it's a legendary tournament held by the goddess of death herself, Nyx, and basically the one person that remains, it gets like some sort of wish that they can request off from the goddess. And the reason why she's put an Aurea goes into this so that way she can develop some sort of power to be able to survive in this world. So they're here where she becomes into an unlikely or alliance with Rain, who helps helps her and protects her during that a little bit, but she's always very distrustful of him, as well as his friend, I can't remember her name as well, but they are kind of all together just trying to survive. Obviously there's more to this that kind of develops, and this tournament lasts the whole entire book, so if you're looking for if that's going to bother you, just keep that in mind, that like it doesn't really drag at all. The pacing was very well done. It's just a matter of just knowing that this whole first book is going through and following them through the tournament, and that relationship, that real enemies to lovers feeling. If you love enemies to lovers, this is like a really good one as well, throughout this book. All right. I definitely enjoyed I definitely really enjoyed the the ending of this, and I'm looking forward to reading the second one. So this is a duology, and I just can't wait. I do know there is like 6 Scorched Roses and something else as well. There's like 2 like standalones that are in this world, but they have no relation into this duology, so you can read those alone. All right, so that is it. Those are all the recommendations that I can think of the past year. As you can tell, I haven't really read too many yet, but I have been enjoying delving back into this genre of fantasy or paranormal as vampires, and it's always going to be, I think, something that I love to read is a book about a vampires, especially during the fall season. So that is all of the recommendations I have for you. Don't forget to watch the other videos of the collaborators for this video. I have them, as I mentioned, I will have their channels down in the description box below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that way you can be notified every time I post. Alright, thank you, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.